Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on sampling methods. Now, to get started, I think it's a good idea to have a look at those words on the left, look at the definitions on the right, and see if you can match them up, because it's really important we understand all the key words we're going to be talking about. Okay, so population. This is the whole set of items that are of interest. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean everyone in the world. Population could be, population in a school, or population in an office or a workplace. Okay, so it's just the people that we are interested in finding out some information about. Now, if that population is large, we may not want to ask every single person through like time or money, for example. So we can use a sample. Now, a sample is a selection of observations taken from a subset, like a mini group within the population, and we're going to use that to find out more information about the whole population. Okay, so sample sizes vary, maybe 50, maybe 100, depends on how many people are in the population. Now, sampling frame, I probably should have said sampling frame there rather than a sample frame, but it doesn't really matter. But that is the most important word, or two words, on this screen. Now, that is a list of all the sampling units of a population. So what we mean by that, so let's go to a workplace. So you have everyone in your workplace on a list, and you would assign them a number. Okay, so they are either individually numbered or they're individually named. Now that takes us nicely onto a sample unit, and that just refers to the individual people of that population. So let's stay with that workplace. That would be the individual person. Okay, so you and I, if we're working there, we would be sample units, and as a collective we would form the sampling frame. Now, a census is when we actually observe or measure every member of a population, which is obviously pretty rare and it's costly. It would take a long time. But let's say at school we wanted to get the opinion of every parent from how we've dealt with the COVID crisis, for example. So we could use like SurveyMonkey. Since that's come out, that's really good for getting large amounts of data off people, and it's quick and easy. So we could use a census on all the parents and get feedback from every single one, rather than a sample of say 50. Now, I've seen this come up in exams, so write this as a definition or define statistic. I really struggled at first, but this is the best example I can think of writing. So it's a calculation based only on known data. Now it takes us onto the different types of data that we can have. So there are 4 types. Now the bottom 2 we need to know about, but you don't really deal with them too much in statistics. But discrete data, that is a variable that can only take on specific values. So for example, in this picture here, we've got a lot of dogs there in a pack. How many are there? You can't, let's say for argument's sake there's 15. I haven't counted them, but you can't say there's 15.2. They can only take on exact values like 15 or 16 or 17. So that is discrete. Continuous, however, if you think about measuring your height, there are a whole range of variables that can be. Okay, so not variables, a whole range of different results that it could be. So even if you looked at to the nearest centimetre, 170, 171 for example, but there's also 170.2, and there's an infinite amount of results between that and 0.3, so that's continuous. Now qualitative, that is non-numerical data like hair colour, and quantitative is numerical data. So in statistics we mainly use quantitative. Now this is the more important bit. So we've got types of sampling, and there are 2 types, or 2 main headings, and the first one is random and the second is non-random. Now if you can do a random sample, that's always going to be better. It's not always possible, which we'll see later. But I've written there, and I'm going to make a massive point throughout this whole video, is random sampling requires a sampling frame. So there are 3 types of these, so simple random, systematic and stratified. And again, I've put it on there, these all require a sampling frame. So let's have a look at the simple random. Now, so let's imagine we're in a workplace and we've got these men and women working there. Okay, and what we're going to do, we're going to give them, that's our sample for our population, or it could be our entire population. Let's say that's our entire population. We're going to give them a number. By doing so, we have now formed our sampling frame, so we can do a simple random sample technique. Let's say we don't want to ask all 18, we only want to ask 6 people. So what we're going to do to get those 6 people, we can't just take the first 6, that's not random. We're going to use our calculator and we're going to generate 6 random numbers. Okay, and if any numbers come up twice, we're going to ignore those and just keep going until we've got the 6, and then we're going to ask those specific 6 people. Now another choice you could have is systematic. So if we take those same 18 people, and if we also say we want a sample of 6, what you could do, well, because there's 18 and we want 6, 18 divided by 6 is 3. So we could look to take every third number or every third person. Now what's important is the first number must always be random. So we can't just start on 1 or start on 3, for example. We're going to choose at random. So we use our calculator, let's say it's 5. We will then take every third person we would get to. Now you can see in this example, we wouldn't get the opinions of any men at all, which you may say is a bit naff, but also if it's a larger, it wouldn't be too hard to ask all 18 in this instance. But if it's in a larger sample, it's very rare that you wouldn't get a diverse response, for example, men and women. But if you want to guarantee you ask men and women, you could use a stratified sample. Now, let's have a look at this, for example. So we'll go to a school. We've got year 3 pupils, year 4 and year 5, and that's how many people we've got in there. And we're not going to ask all of those because it would take forever. Now, let's say we want a sample of 50 in total. Would it be fair to ask the same amount of people from year 3, year 4 and year 5? No, and that can't even be done because 50 doesn't divide by 3. So, how can we do this fairly? So we would just work out the fraction of the year 3 pupils. So for example, you can see there's 120 pupils out of 310 in total, and we're going to find the fraction of 50. And we're going to do that for all 3 of them. Quite often you'll get a decimal answer which we'll have to round, and you're always going to round down or round up, and just make sure when you finish these add up to the number you want. So we'd ask 19 year 3, 16 year 4 and 15 year 5 pupils. But once we know how many we want, we've also then got to go back to those 120 or 190 pupils and then use a random sample. It could be systematic or it could be a simple random. It's up to you, but the stratified part just finds out how many are in each group. Which takes us on to non-random sampling, and we do this when a sampling frame is not possible. And we're going to have a look at a question in a minute which explains that really nicely. So, for example, quota sampling, you could be maybe on a street, on a high street for example. You can't number all those people, they're going in and out all the time. That's an example where sampling frame is not possible. So a quota, you'd have a person maybe interviewing people. They may want to talk to, say, people in the age of 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60. And they'll have an idea of how many people they want in each of those groups. And once it's filled, they'll speak to someone and say, how old are you in this bracket? Ask them some questions. And once they've filled their quota for each age group, they'll move on to the next one and won't ask anyone else in that quota. Convenience or opportunity, it's just asking people that are available at that time that fit the criteria. Okay, so again, that could be on a high street, or it could be, you're looking at African lions and you want the health of them. You're just going to take them when you see them. You're not going to get them all lined up in a line because things could get nasty. So here's an exam question, 8-mark exam question, and I've chosen this one because it's answered incredibly badly throughout the years. So we have a lake, has 3 species of fish. There's estimated to be 1,400 trout, 600 bass, 450 pike. And we want to look at the health of the fish, see if this lake is still performing, whether we've had some unwanted guests that are eating the fish, or some problems with the algae that is killing them all off, or something like that. So we want to inspect it, make sure we're doing our bit for nature. So we want a sample of 30 fish. Now the first question is, why is a stratified random sampling not suitable. Now that may have been the one you wanted to go for because you can see the groups. But it's not possible for one reason: there is no sampling frame. We don't know how many fish there are in there, and we can't get them all out to number them, and we can't say, oh, I want the 27th trout. It's not possible. So part B, which method are we going to use? Well, quota sampling. So if there's no sampling frame, we have to go to non-random sampling. And quota is very similar to stratified in the way that we can have groups. So that's the one we're going to want. An advantage is we're going to get all 3 varieties of fish. We're definitely going to get that. And a disadvantage, it could take a long time to fill all those quotas because, the first 30 fish we might get out are trout, for example. We don't want all 30 to be trout, but we have to keep going until we fulfill a sample of each one. And how would it work? So for 4 marks, you need to say how many of each fish you're going to catch. So for example, like the stratified technique, exactly the same, we need to work out how many fish are going to be in there. So that's going to get you some marks for that. You need to say that once we caught a fish, we would assign it to a quota. So if we caught a bass, we put it into the bass quota. And we're going to keep going until that quota is full. So if we catch 8 bass, for example, we're going to ignore the 8th one. We're just going to put it back in. We're not going to survey it. Yep, and that's it. Just keep going until the quota are all filled. So that's how you get 8 marks on a pretty simple sampling question, but it's answered very, very badly. So I hope that all makes sense, everyone, and best of luck with your questions.